Hello and welcome to IT Chronicles 10 in Tech. We're here at Refresh 19 in Las Vegas. I'm here with my colleague, Kathleen Wilson.
Thank you.
And our guest today is Damian Roskill from Device 42.
Hey,
welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. So, Damian, I know you guys have been around for what, 7-8 years or so, roughly. But it is a space that maybe a lot of folks haven't really dealt with. So, tell us a little bit about what you do. I mean, we're familiar with you, but tell us, tell our audience, what is Device 42?
So when I think about, all companies today are technology companies, right? Every company has just tons and tons of technology in it. As these companies have grown, they've added to it, they've migrated, they've moved from, mainframe to client server, on and on and on, right? And all of that history, all of the documentation, all of the knowledge of that infrastructure becomes critical for that business to be able to move forward and to really get to being an agile business, right? But the key problem that they're running into is just they don't really understand what they have, right? We've talked to dozens of companies, hundreds of companies, and they all say the same thing. Oh yeah, we have a really clear understanding of what we have. And then we get in there and we find out they have no idea.
As soon as they say that, like, oh boy, this is a bigger problem than we
exactly.
than they even realize. Yeah.
So what does Device 42 do? We're a discovery and inventory management tool, right? So we go into these organizations, put in our software, and then automatically discover all of your IT estate. And what makes us kind of different and special is the breadth of our discovery. So we discover everything, we like to say, from OpenVMS to Docker, right. So everything and everything in between.
Right. And obviously, discovery isn't the purpose. Just finding stuff isn't the purpose. It's really how it gets consumed. So upstream and downstream, there's a lot of other processes, especially in service management or just operationally, that leverage that information, right? So the accuracy of that is really the crux of things, right? Because garbage in, garbage out. If you're not getting it in there, and just too much volume itself, we already know organizations have far too much data that they don't know what to do with. So providing them even more bad data is making it even worse.
And if you think about trends like AI ops, right? How can those functions really run if they have bad data, right? Part of the thing we're here at Refresh announcing is our partnership with Fresh Service, where we're going to be integrating all of our data into Fresh Service. And what that means is that for every trouble ticket that comes in, you're going to have the most accurate information on your infrastructure, regardless of whether it's sitting on someone's desktop, a server sitting in a data center, or a service living up in the cloud.
Right.
Yeah, because that's what a lot of support professionals struggle with is like, what are we talking about, right? Like, because customer can call in about one thing, but they actually mean another, right? Like we've had quite a few scenarios when they're actually talking about a service and it's some downstream infrastructure issue, right? They're just like, well, I can't access my email, right? So that usually, tells you, and it's like, well, what are those components that comprise email in your organization?
Right, so with Device 42, when you get a ticket, you're going to see everything that you need to do to solve, from a technology perspective, everything that's going on with that particular set of infrastructure. And that includes things like, what applications are dependent on a given service? If this is down, how does it impact my customers? Which customers does it impact? All of that, everybody talks about, lowering mean time to resolution, but we've seen that. So, having that data faster, built right into Fresh Service makes a big difference.
Oh yes, definitely. And then also too, when you go back and you're looking at some of the traditional service management processes like problem management, you need configuration information to even start that, or you're just like, it's a needle in a haystack approach when you're trying to define trends and issues in the environment when you don't have good data associated with your instance.
And that's just another example, by the way, of like other places that this data goes. So, we think about it as being integrated into ITSM, but it also goes into the DevOps world, right? So having that knowledge about your infrastructure, which is, now becoming very dynamic with with Docker containers, all of that, having that real-time picture makes automation possible. So if you don't have that picture, you can't really automate.
Yeah, and in the DevOps world, every incident is a bug, right? So it's an incident. It's not a service desk problem. It's a software problem. It's a bug. We need to address that. So are you seeing integration to some DevOps principles and practices as well?
Well, we integrate with a wide variety. I mean, we've developed quite an ecosystem of different parts of the software stack to integrate with. So that includes things like ITSM. We've talked about that. Fresh Service being the best example of that. But we also integrate with things like configuration management, like Chef, Puppet, those kinds of services. And then we integrate finally with services like Splunk and other services in that space as well.
Well, and it's important too, because I think configuration management, and this is Kathleen's humble opinion, okay, it died because it became just data held by the service desk or the service desk tool. It wasn't leveraged as data to be shared across the enterprise, right? So you have configuration data here. It's like, well, you're just stewards of it at the service desk level. It's like, really, this information should be out with the devs, right? So they can identify, deployment patterns. What are our deployment patterns? Where are we deploying to? What bugs do we have in our infrastructure?
It's one of the things that I found most interesting, actually, that I really wasn't expecting when I came on board Device 42, which is that the tool really enables collaboration. And I hadn't really thought of it as a collaboration tool. But by having data and having it connect to all these different services and then having a really, really strong API, so people can get any data out of our software that they want. They can use it in places like Power BI and any place they want it to live. But that in turn allows the organization to work more effectively together across these silos. So IT, DevOps work better together. I've worked in organizations where those two organizations were at opposite ends of the building.
Pretty typical.
Right? So seeing them sort of come together and say, hey, oftentimes we'll go into a company and we'll start in one group, and then somebody will say, hey, where'd you get that data? And they'll say, oh, we got it from Device 42. Can we have access to that data? And it's like, yeah, absolutely you can.
Yeah. And that's the big thing. I mean, obviously, you haven't spent a few years in configuration management. That's the big thing. I try to always explain to folks. It's like, yeah, this is raw data at these levels, at these discrete and disparate areas. But as soon as you start pulling that together and you have that correlation to the incident history or the problem history and that sort of thing, now from an architectural perspective, wouldn't it be great when you're building out V2, V3 of that architecture to understand, hey, we have 6 versions out there. Here's the different configurations of those different versions. This one has a lot more incidents than these. What was the problem? Architecturally, we can then do our next version based on something that was far more reliable. But you need all that raw data, that's reliable. Not 7 times removed and God only knows what what happened.
And it's just stepping over into the dev side of the world. I think that's really, really important, right? It's because configuration data, when it lives over in just operations, the decision making is very one lens focused on that, right? It's just infrastructure. It's not about designing better software and services for customers.
That's not their purpose.
No, it's not their purpose.
Yeah. But it's also kind of all blurring now at the same time, right? So, when you've got hybrid infrastructure coming, which is what we see, that's a very strong trend. We actually see people pulling applications back out of the cloud into the data center, into their own cloud, right?
The same data center.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah,
For us that have been around for long enough, it's like we have this issue with clouds and private clouds, and like, oh, there was my data center that was elsewhere. But anyway.
But as they're trying to move those applications, applications are much more fluid now, right? So I'm utilizing this technology in Azure, and this technology in Google, and this technology, and then I've got some of this living locally. And so, and by the way, when something happens, I may turn around and shift all of that around dynamically. So having that sort of overall view becomes much more important.
Well, thank you for joining us, Damian. I mean, again, these conversations
we
always.
Talk forever about this topic.
I mean, we feel like we've lived in it forever, so I don't know that it's a good thing we keep on talking about forever. But wish you all the best. And I mean, for me, obviously, this is something that I deal with on a daily basis. So looking forward to more successes for you, which means a lot more successes for me on the configuration management side.
All right, thank you both for having me.
Thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you.